France fell in 6 weeks. 6 weeks. One of the greatest armies in the world, a civilization that had given humanity Descartes, Voltaire, Hugo, Camus. It collapsed. It collapsed in 6 weeks. The French government fled Paris. The roads south were choked with 2 million refugees, families pushing carts, carrying whatever they could lift, leaving behind everything they couldn't. Paris was declared an open city, which means we will not fight for this. Come and take it. And somewhere in the chaos of the retreat, dirty, exhausted, humiliated, a philosophy teacher from Paris was waiting to be captured. His name was Matthew, and he has spent 7 years building a philosophy of freedom. It had not prepared him for this. The French title of the book is not Iron in the Soul. The French title is La Morte dans Âme, Death in the Soul. Something has already died in these people before the book begins. Not their bodies, something harder to name. The belief that the world would arrange itself around their dignity. The assumption that civilization, their civilization, the one that produced Voltaire and Hugo, was stronger than the thing marching towards it. That belief is dead, and in its absence, something is about to be born. The retreat is not heroic. It is important that you understand that. We have been trained by stories, by films, by novels, by the way history is packaged for consumption, to expect that defeat comes with a certain tragic grandeur. Flags torn but still flying, men bloodied but unbowed. The noble lost cause. Sartre will not give you that. The retreat in Iron in the Soul is men throwing their rifles into ditches, officers who have stopped giving orders because the orders no longer mean anything, soldiers sleeping by the road, too tired to care anymore, whether the Germans are a mile away or 10, a civilization's military pride dissolving in the summer heat of French countryside. And Matthew walks through all of it. You remember Matthew, right? The man who spent 7 years refusing to become any particular kind of person. The philosopher who preserved freedom. The man who believed that keeping all his options open was the same thing as being alive. There is no option now. History has made exactly one demand from him: surrender. And Matthew, for the first time in 3 novels, is looking at a demand he cannot think his way around. Sartre is doing something precise here. He's removing one by one everything Matthew has used to avoid living fully. His intellectual sophistication, useless in ditch of the road. His cultivated irony, there is nothing ironic about German tanks. His philosophy of freedom, abstract, bloodless, written in cafes, tested against nothing. Strip it all away, and what is left? Just a man in a country that has fallen, with a rifle he doesn't know whether to keep or throw away. And a choice. There is a village, and in the village a church, and in the church a tower. Matthew and a small group of soldiers climb the tower. German forces are in the valley below. There is no strategic reason to hold this position. No reinforcements coming, no tactical value to the church tower of a village whose name history will not record. They know this. They choose to hold it anyway. And Matthew begins to shoot at the German advance, at the tanks in the valley, and at the officers, at everything moving around in that summer afternoon light. And Sartre, in the most extraordinary passage in all 3 novels, shows us what is happening inside Matthew as he shoots. He's not thinking about France. He's not thinking about strategy. He's not thinking about survival, because survival is not on the table. He is thinking about 7 years. 7 years of careful non-commitment, 7 years of preserved options and avoided choices, and philosophy used as a shield against the terrifying work of actually living. Every shot is a yes. Not yes to France, not yes to the war, not yes to an ideology or cause, or a collective or system. Yes to being here, yes to this moment. Yes to the specific, irreversible, costly consequence bearing act of choosing, when choosing costs everything. Sartre writes, and I want you to hear this carefully, that these 15 minutes feel to Matthew like 15 years of his life. More life in 15 minutes of chosen action than in 7 years of preserved freedom. Think about what that means. Not that dying is better than living, not that futile acts are noble, but that there is a quality of aliveness, a density, a realness, a presence that is only available when you have committed completely. When there is no exit, when the choice is irreversible, when you are entirely, wholly, without reservation, here. Most of us never feel this, not because our lives are less dramatic than Matthew's, but because we are always leaving ourselves a way out. A reservation at a different restaurant, a foot still on the platform, one eye on the door. We are never fully in the room. Matthew in that tower is finally completely in the room. The 15-minute ends, the tower falls, and Sartre leaves the scene without telling us what happens to Matthew. He does not tell us if Matthew survives. He does not tell us if anyone remembers. He does not tell us if it mattered in any measurable historical consequence bearing sense, whether those 15 minutes happened at all. Because that is not the point. The point is not the outcome. The point is the quality of act. The point is that Matthew finally, after 3 novels, after 7 years of bad faith, after a summer of preserved option, and a Munich of collective delusion, and a retreat through the ruins of everything he thought would hold, chose, fully, irreversibly, as himself. The second movement of this book takes place inside a wire, a German prisoner of war camp, tens of thousands of French soldiers, fences, guards, the complete physical, legal annihilation of individual freedom. And Brunette is here. You remember Brunette, Matthew's communist friend, the man, his entire self, to the party, who used ideology the way Matthews used philosophy, as a structure that would make his choices for him, as an escape for the terrifying work of being free. Brunette is trying to organize the prisoners for the cause. Even here, even inside the wire, even with Germany having defeated France, Brunette has his instructions, his discipline, his clarity, while everyone around him is fragmenting, losing themselves in despair, in collaboration, in the slow dissolution of identity that imprisonment produces. Brunette is certain, or he thinks he is. And then the information arrives. The Soviet Union, the ideological home of everything, Brunette has given his life to, has signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, a non-aggression agreement with Nazi Germany. The party, without telling Brunette, without asking Brunette, without considering what it might mean for the man sitting in a German prison camp on behalf of the communist cause, has made peace with the regime imprisoning him. The structure cracks, and underneath the crack, underneath 30 years of ideological certainty, underneath the discipline and the clarity, and the beautiful, terrible simplicity of a life lived in service of a cause, Brunette finds something he has spent his entire life arranging never to encounter: his own freedom, raw, unmediated, and undeniable. And after a lifetime of running from it, completely, overwhelmingly his. Let's stay with Brunette for a moment, because his experience, though it is dressed in 1940s ideology, is one of the most universal experiences a human being can have. The moment that structure you built your life inside reveals itself to be insufficient, the party that betrays its principles, the religion that covers up its failures, the company that turns out not to value what it said it valued, the movement that becomes the thing it was fighting against, the relationship that reveals after years that it was built on something other than what you thought. In that moment, you are Brunette in the camp. The wire is still there, the guards are still there. The situation has not improved, but the ideology is gone. The story you told yourself about why this was all worth it is gone. And you must do the hardest thing a human being can do. You must decide. Not what your side thinks, not what your tribe believes, not what the structures demand, what you think, what you believe, and what you stripped of every scaffold, every collective, every borrowed certainty. Choose. Okay, so we have traveled a long distance together. 3 books, 3 stages of a single argument. Let me name what the argument is. In the age of reason, Sartre showed us freedom misunderstood. Matthew believed freedom was the absence of commitment, the refusal to become any particular person, the preservation of all options. And Sartre showed us gently, devastatingly, that this is not freedom, that this is the most sophisticated form of imprisonment available to an intelligent person. A cage with no bars, a prison of perpetual possibility that never becomes actual life. In the reprieve, Sartre showed us freedom threatened. He showed us what happens when history arrives and demands a response from people who have been practicing their responses in theory. He showed us collective bad faith, an entire civilization choosing comfort over truth, and the price that comfort eventually extracts. He showed us that freedom is always situated, that you are never free in the abstract, but always free as a specific person inside a specific moment of history, and that history will not wait for you to finish theorizing. And in Iron in the Soul, Sartre shows us freedom claimed, not philosophized, not theorized, not preserved, but claimed, in the specific, costly, irreversible act of a man in a church tower choosing to be fully present in the last minutes of his life. And here is what Sartre is saying across all 3 books. In all their sprawling, difficult, uncomfortable, unfinished glory, it is enough. It is enough to act well now, even if it is too late to change anything, even if no one sees it, even if it costs you everything, even if history swallows it whole and leaves no record. It is enough to choose fully now as yourself. And for you, maybe he wants to talk to you directly for a moment, not about 1940, about right now. You are living in a world that presents you every day with the opportunities to practice exactly the bad faith. Sartre spent 3 novels diagnosing the world will tell you, wait, not yet. Once things are clearer, once you're more certain, once the circumstances are better, once you have figured out exactly who you are supposed to be, what you're supposed to do. Sartre's answer, earned through 3 books and a war, and a church tower in France, and a prisoner of war camp, and a man firing at tanks he cannot stop, is this: the circumstances will never be better, the certainty will never arrive. There is no version of this where you have all the information and all the time and all the safety you need to finally begin. There is only this moment, this situation, this choice, and that is yours. The person you have been waiting to become is not waiting for better conditions. That person is ever made in the specific, imperfect, costly, maybe doomed, chosen act. Not someday, not when things are clearer, not when you're ready, but now. There was supposed to be a 4th book. Sartre called it The Last Chance. It was supposed to show the characters joining the French resistance. Matthew, if he survived the tower, moving from solitary, futile, beautiful defiance into organized, collective political resistance. Brunette, freed from the camp, freed from the party, freed finally into his own freedom, choosing again, genuinely this time, as himself. The full flowering of everything the trilogy built towards. The answer finally written. Sartre published one fragment, a chapter called Strange Friendship. In it, Brunette is still in the camp. He is questioning the party openly now. And he forms an unlikely friendship with another prisoner, a man named Vicarious, who had no ideology, no collective, no borrowed certainty, just a man making choices because they are his choices. And then Sartre stopped. He published the fragment in 1949 and never returned to it. The 4th book was never written. For years, critics asked why. The cynical answer Sartre could not figure out: how to depict authentic political commitment without it becoming a propaganda. Because every time he tried to show the resistance as the answer, the resistance became an ideology. And ideologies for Sartre always risks becoming the new bad faith, the new structure people hide inside to escape the terrifying work of individual freedom. But there is another reading. The fourth book was never written because it cannot be written, not by Sartre, not by anyone, because authentic freedom, the freedom Matthew finally claimed in those 15 minutes, the freedom Brunet is just beginning to discover in the ruins of his ideology, cannot be narrated from the outside. It can only be lived from the inside by you. The resistance is not a chapter in the novel Sartre never finished. The resistance is what you do with what you have learned in your life, in your situation, and in your freedom. Sartre never told us how the story ends because that was never his story to tell. You exist before you have an essence, before you have a purpose, before you have a definition that someone else have assigned to you and you have accepted because it was easier than building your own. You exist and you are free, completely, inescapably, terrifyingly. And the only question that has ever mattered, the only question 3 books and a war and a church tower and a prisoner of war camp, a man who sat in a Paris cafe under Nazi occupation and wrote 800 pages insisting that you are free. The only question is what you will do with it. Existence Precedes Essence by Jean-Paul Sartre. There is a particular kind of book that doesn't end when you close it. You put it down, walk back into your life, pour a glass of water, look out of the window, and something has shifted. Not dramatically, not with fanfare, but something in the quality of how you see has changed. The way you vision changes after sitting in a dark room and stepping back into daylight. Jean-Paul Sartre's Road to Freedom trilogy is that kind of work. Not because it is comfortable, it isn't, of course. Not because it flatters the reader, it doesn't. But because it does something that the best philosophy always does. It takes the abstractions we use to manage our existence and turns them into the raw, difficult breathing material they came from. It makes the theoretical personal, it makes the personal urgent, and it leaves you at the end with nowhere to hide. Here is what it taught me, and here is what I believe it is trying to teach all of us. Freedom is not what you think it is. We come to the word freedom carrying a lifetime of its popular usage. Freedom as open road, freedom as blank calendar, freedom as the absence of obligation, the elimination of constraints, the life with nothing pressing in it from any side. Matthew believes this. He has built an entire existence around it. And Sartre, with the quiet precision of a surgeon, spends an entire novel showing us what this philosophy actually produces. It produces nothing. Not nothing in the sense of chaos or destruction. Nothing in the more devastating sense. Emptiness. A life that has been so carefully preserved from commitment that it has never been fully inhabited. A man who has kept every door open so long that he has walked through none of them. The lesson is not gentle, but it is generous. The freedom we fantasize about, the freedom of pure possibility, of radical non-commitment, of permanent optionality, is not freedom at all. It is the most sophisticated cage available to an intelligent person. It looks like liberation from the inside. It produces precise symptoms of imprisonment. Real freedom, Sartre insists, is not the freedom from commitment. It is the freedom to commit fully, irreversibly, with complete awareness of what the commitment costs. The open hand holds nothing, only the closed hand. The hand that has chosen to grip something knows what it means to hold. In an era that celebrates optionality as the highest value, keep your options open, don't burn bridges, never close a door, This is a lesson that stings precisely because it is true. Not choosing is also a choice. This is perhaps the most practically useful idea in the entire trilogy, and it is also the one we most desperately want to refuse. Every morning, you do not begin, you have begun. You have chosen to wait. Every relationship you do not commit to, you have committed to its ambiguity. Every conversation you postpone, you have chosen postponement. And the postponements have consequences, and those consequences accumulate, and they become your life. Not the life you imagined, the one you actually lived, the one constructed, not from your grand decisions, but from your small avoidances. Sartre is ruthless about this. He does not allow us the comfort of passive voice. Things do not happen to us. We do not find ourselves in situations. We have chosen and chosen and chosen again, often without noticing, often in the guise of waiting. And the sum of those invisible choices is the person we have become. That is not a counsel of anxiety, it is a counsel of attention. Pay attention on what you are choosing. When you think you are choosing nothing, the life being built in the spaces between your deliberate decisions is still your life. It is still your responsibility. History will not ask your permission. The reprieve delivers its lessons through the most uncomfortable method available. It makes the personal political in the most literal sense. It places ordinary, self absorbed, privately struggling human beings inside a moment of civilizational crisis and shows us what happens when history arrives and the theory meets the situation. What happens mostly is that the theory is useless, not wrong necessarily, useless, because there is a vast difference between understanding freedom philosophically and inhabiting it under pressure, between knowing what you would do in the hard situation and discovering what you actually do when it arrives. The Munich Agreement, that monument to collective self deception, stands in the novel as a mirror for every era, including ours. Sartre's characters are not uniquely cowardly or uniquely foolish. They are humans. They want the comfortable interpretation to be the true one. They want the piece of paper to mean what Chamberlain says it means. They want the problem to be solved without the cost of solving it. And the lesson delivered not as a lecture but as a slow, suffocating dramatic experience is this: the comfortable interpretation is almost never the true one. The looking away has a price. The collective decision not to know what you could know is still a decision, and it is made by individuals, one by one, each telling themselves that their particular looking away is excusable, is reasonable, is what anyone would do. We are living in an era of looking away. We are all, in various degrees, practicing the Munich Agreement on something. The question the novel leaves us with is not a comfortable one. What are you choosing not to see, and the follow up, etc.? It's equally uncomfortable. What will it cost when you can no longer choose not to see it? You cannot outsource your freedom. Daniel's arc, his invention of God as a solution to the problem of self definition, is the most psychologically precise portrait of bad faith in the trilogy. And it is the most contemporary also. It is not unusual, it is universal. The specific form of his escape, theological, in 1938 Paris, is particular. But the underlying movement, the decision to adopt a structure, not because you believe in it, but because believing in it excuses you from the work of deciding what you believe in. This is the defining spiritual crisis of every era. We outsource our freedom constantly to our political tribe, which will think of us, to our social role, which will define us, to our relationships, which will tell us who we are, to our career, which will give us a story to inhabit. None of these things are wrong in themselves: the tribe, the role, the relationship, the career. These are the textures of a human life. The problem is not having them. The problem is using them as a substitute for a harder, lonelier, more essential work of deciding what you actually believe in, what you actually value, What would you actually do if all the structures were removed and only you remained? Sartre's answer to Daniel is not to abandon structure. It is to choose your structures consciously, hold them honestly, and never mistake your commitments for your identity. You are not your job, you are not your politics, you are not your ideology. You are not your religion, you are not your relationship. You are the consciousness that has chosen and keeps choosing how to inhabit all of these things. Remove that choosing consciousness, surrender it to the structure, and you have not found yourself. You have lost yourself in the most total way available. Authentic freedom requires an irreversible act. The church tower, there is no philosophical argument in the trilogy as powerful as those 15 minutes. Not because it proves something, it doesn't, in any logical sense, but because it shows something that argument cannot reach. It shows us what authentic freedom actually feels like from the inside. And what it feels like is not comfortable. It does not feel like a blank calendar or an open road. It feels like heat returning to something cold. It feels like becoming finally undeniably, specifically real. It feels like difference between a life theorized and a life lived. The lesson is not that you must die for your choices. It is more demanding than that. The lesson is that you must be willing to lose something of your choices. A choice that costs you nothing is not really a choice. It is a preference. A commitment that has no price is not really a commitment. It is a whim. Real choice, authentic freedom costs something. The relationship you commit to closes off other relationships. The cause you give yourself to make demands on your time, your comfort, your safety, the person you decide to be excludes the people you could have been. This is not tragedy. This is the texture of an actual life, as opposed to a theoretical one. Matthew's 7 years of preserved freedom brought him nothing, cost him nothing, and produced nothing, because he was never willing to pay the price of real choice. His 15 minutes in the tower costs him everything, and gave him, for the first time, everything back. The opposite of bad faith is not certainty. This is perhaps the hardest lesson in the trilogy and the most liberating one. We wait for certainty. The certainty never comes. It cannot come. The information is always incomplete. The future is always opaque. And the guarantee is never available. Sartre's answer, earned through Matthew's paralysis, Europe's self deception, Brunet's ideological collapse, and the 15 minutes in the tower, is not a counsel of recklessness. It is something far more nuanced and more useful. Act in full awareness that you might be wrong. Commit knowing the commitment might be misplaced. Choose knowing the choice might be wrong one. Do it anyway, not despite the uncertainty within it, not pretending the uncertainty isn't there, acknowledging it fully and choosing anyway. This is what Sartre means by authenticity, not certainty, not heroism, not the absence of doubt, but the willingness to be fully accountably present in your choices, to own them, to bear their consequences, to say I did this knowingly in full awareness of what I didn't know. And to call that ownership, however terrifying, however costly what it is, your humanity. The trilogy ends officially with the published texts in the prisoner of war camp and the church tower, both in ruins, both stripped of the structures that sustained them, both in different ways finally honest, and then it ends again. Truly, philosophically, in the silence of a fourth book that was never written. Sartre stopped. He could not write the resistance. He could not write the answer, not because the answer does not exist, but because the answer is not his to write. It is yours. It is ours. The resistance is not a chapter in the novel. It is what you do on Monday morning with what you have understood. It is how you inhabit your relationships, having understood the cost of bad faith. It is how you make your choices, having understood that not choosing is also choosing. It is how you commit, fully, imperfectly, without the certainty you will never have, to the specific, unrepeatable consequence bearing life that is yours to live. 3 novels, 3 stages, 1 argument. You exist before you have an essence. You are thrown into a world you did not choose, in a body you did not select, in a historical moment you did not design. You have a situation, limited, constrained, imperfect, sometimes brutal. And within that situation, always without exception, regardless of the external circumstances, you have your freedom. The only question worth asking, the question Sartre spent his career, his occupation, his entire intellectual life pressing into our hands, is the simplest and the hardest one available. What will you do with it? Not someday, not when things are clearer, not when you're ready, but now.